Highlanders' honour.
Written by Barbara Bard and published by Starfall Publications. Book from Highlanders Fighting for Love series. Save more with our ebook and audiobook bundles on our website, starfallpublicationsbooks.com. Subscribe for more audiobooks. Enjoy.
Chapter 1. Dartsorn tinged the eastern horizon a bright pink, perhaps hinting at the warm day ahead. Birds chirped from their thickets, rousing with the new sun, darting from the branches like tiny arrows as the cantering horse disturbed them into flight. The mount's grey legs sent pollen from the purple heather up into the light breeze as it crossed the moors of northern England. The horse's rider expertly guided it across a shallow streamlet, leapt a low stone wall, and galloped up the hill. Lady Catrin Waterford, daughter of the Duke of Whitewood, reined in at the top of the hill to glance back. Her escort, two of her father's retainers, loped in her wake. But as she demanded they ride a distance behind her to give her some semblance of privacy, they rode nearly a half-mile to her rear. Chirruping to her mount, she cantered down the far side, just as the sun broke over the horizon. She took her left hand off her reins, long enough to cast back the hood of the light cloak she wore against the early dawn's damp chill. Catrin gazed at the sunrise, then closed her eyes and tilted her head back to further feel the strong horse beneath her, the new sun's rays kissing her cheeks. Unfettered, her wild mane of rich auburn hair flew behind her like a war banner. Her gelding stumbled, forcing her to open her eyes. Catrin gasped, her heart hammering in her chest. No fewer than a dozen riders raced towards her, their horses leaping thickets and dodging rocks. Not highwaymen. She observed the familiar brigandines, the heavy two-handed swords, the stern faces. Scots, armed with bows as well as swords, they called to one another in that despicable dialect of the Scottish Highlands. Fear and anger rushed through her as she hauled on her reins, forcing the grey to slide forward under his momentum, his rear quarters slung low. Wheeling the gelding around, Catrin plunged her heels into his sides, urging him into a full run. Racing up the low-lying hill, she glanced back once, finding the horsemen had spread out in case she changed directions, and closing the distance. Crossing the hill she had just descended, Catrin discovered to her horror that 5 more Scots dashed in to cut her off from her escape. And her guards. "Eh, lads," called one, a tall red-haired man who gestured to the north. "Coot a ofnu." Riders from behind her swept up and to her left, forcing her toward the right, into the direction of the rider who yelled. Even as he closed the distance between them, his red hair flying in the wind, Catrin saw her opening. If she could just nip past him before he reached that rock. Pushing her gelding harder, she raced the Scot, shooting glances at him even as she screamed for help from her guards. She was seconds too late. The red-haired horseman cut in front of her, forcing her gelding to rear or be forced to slam headlong into his black. Catrin grasped for the pommel of her saddle as the grey's hooves climbed high and missed her grip. Unbalanced, she toppled backward over the cantle to hit the ground hard. Her breath knocked from her lungs. She had no air to scream as the Scotsman flung himself from his saddle even before his horse came to a trampling halt. The others circled around her, trotting their horses in a huge milling group, giving her no chance to rise to her feet and run. Seizing her by her arms, the Scot stood her upright, then spun her around. Catrin, despite her inability to draw breath, fought him, trying to pull her hands loose, to kick him, to bite. Her strength was no match for his, and he bound her hands tightly behind her with a tough leather strap. "Gae, lads, chase the lassie's men oof!" 6 of his men, if he was indeed the leader of this band, immediately split away from the group and galloped westward. Catrin knew her father's men-at-arms stood no chance to free her, as grossly outnumbered as they were. Hope of rescue or escape from these foul men died as she fought now to get her breath back. Hope, perhaps, had died within her, but her defiance had not. As the leader turned her to face him, she spat in his face, her spittle smacking him square on his hawk-like nose. Glaring at him, still unable to speak, she expected him to backhand her for her insult. Instead, he grinned. "Ah, lads, seems we ha' here a wee spitfire of a lass," he said, arming her defiance from his face with his sleeve. "I dinna expect a great noble lady to fight so." She studied him as she waited for her breath to return. Tall he was, with broad shoulders and lean, narrow hips. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye down his cheek, yet she never thought she had seen a comelier man. His hazel green eyes stared at her with a hint of admiration, framed by long dark lashes. His smiling lips appeared full and ripe for kissing, and his teeth were pure white, not brown as so many people's were. Slowly air seeped back into Catrin's lungs. "Let me go," she gritted, "or I will have you drawn and quartered by sunset." "Ye will nae be drawin' nor quarterin' nobody, me Lady Catrin," he replied easily, "for ye be halfway to me castle in the Highlands by sunset." Catrin stiffened. "You know who I am?" "Ah, course, me lady, dae ye ken who I be?" "How can I? I have never seen you before in my life." "Then let me introduce myself." He grinned, his merry, hazel-green eyes dancing in his lean face. "I be Ranulf Thorburn, heir to the Laird of Clan Thorburn." She physically felt the blood drain from her flesh. A chill crept into her body. The air left her lungs again in a short whoosh. Fear, no, terror swept through her as she recognised the name. Clan Thorburn, Kyle Thorburn. She did not realise she spoke the name aloud until Ranulf nodded. "Aye, milady, your da did murder me elder brother." "Liar!" she screamed. "Your brother murdered mine and was hanged for it." "Me brother dinna slay yez," he snapped, his scarred face now suffused with rage. "He be innocent, so he were. You'd a murdered him without proof, so he did." "So, you are going to kill me in revenge?" "Revenge, aye," he breathed. "Tay kill ye, I dinna ken yet." "If you kill me, you will be hanged just like your brother." In Sassenach lands, perhaps," he answered, his anger seemingly gone as fast as it appeared. "Nay, north of the border. That be where we be heeded noo." Before Catrin had a chance to answer, his 6 men returned, trotting their horses into the midst of the others. "The Sassenach do run Ranulf," one of them said. "Nae doubt they run for home to gather more to hunters doon." "Aye, lads, we be going," Ranulf said, seizing her by the arm and dragging her toward her grey gelding. The horse now stood quietly with his reins in a clansman's fist. With all the effort he might display in lifting a child, Ranulf picked her up by her waist and planted her in her saddle. Despite the awkwardness of having her hands tied behind her back, she slipped her feet into her stirrups and balanced herself as he took her reins. Leading the grey to his own black, who stood quietly grazing nearby, Ranulf vaulted into his saddle and grinned down at her. "Noo, dinna be thinking to throw yourself off to escape, for then I be tying you cross your saddle, lass. I wouldna wish your pretty face damaged, neither." Nudging his horse into first a trot and then a rolling canter, Ranulf led his band north across the moors, Catrin snugged close beside him. Fear still rampaged through her blood, but she kept it under strict control. If he wanted her dead, he would not have taken the trouble to kidnap her and take her into Scotland. "How did you know where I was?" she asked. Ranulf grinned. "Ah, lass, that be too easy. You ride every morning your day, always keeping your lads behind. You dinna want to be taken, lass. Dinna keep a routine." "I will remember that in the future," Catrin replied dryly. Chuckling, he winked at her. "Ye be a fine, brave lass, ye are, me lady, a warrior." "Free my hands and give me a bow," she replied. "I'll then shoot out your left eye from 300 yards. "Ye be that guide?" Indeed, I am. Beauty, with the skills of a warrior, he said, admiring. I dae be impressed myself. I swear I ne'er seen eyes like yours before. The colour of honey they are. Catrin shrugged. They are eyes like any other. He glanced up and down her body. Skin like fine porcelain, slender as a whip. His gaze travelled over her hair, blowing into tangles from the wind created by their speed. Oh, me lady, I dae swear ye bewitched me with your beauty. I would find it most difficult to slit your throat should I decide to. I am certain that's not difficult for you at all, sir, Catrin replied, as your murdering brother's blood runs in your veins as well. Though she expected a burst of rage from him and braced herself, she felt almost disappointed when he simply eyed her sidelong and shrugged. Just as your murdering da's blood run in you. Tempted to ask him how he can be so certain his brother did not murder hers, Catrin kept her mouth closed and gazed around her. The sun rose higher in the sky, warming the morning as larks and sparrows, disturbed from their nests in the thickets, flew up with frightened chirps. A doe bounded away from their menace on stick-like legs and light hooves as Ranulf's men behind her spoke of chasing it. Walking and trotting their horses by turn to spare them, they travelled onward, ever north, avoiding villages and people. Catrin knew they were still on her father's lands, but could think of no means of escaping Ranulf and his men. Her father, the powerful Duke of Whitewood, no doubt knew by now she had been taken by brigands, and would even now be on her trail with 100 men at arms. Yet, despite this knowledge, her heart sank. Her father was not a robust or well man. He could not ride far, and whenever he was forced to travel, would take a carriage in very slow stages. While he may force himself to hunt down his daughter's kidnappers, he could not cross the border into Scotland without risking a war. Tension between the two countries remained high, and it would take the mere tiniest of sparks to ignite the flames of war. Donal. Ranulf stood in his stirrups and half turned, shouting down the line of men, Ride back! Watch your back trail! Sitting in his saddle again, he grinned at Catrin. Wouldn't they want you to sneak in up behind us? Knew would we? No, of course not, she replied, her tone caustic. You might get hanged, like your brother. Once again, she underestimated his sense of humour. He chuckled, refusing to rise to her bait. She studied him unobtrusively, wondering what sort of man permits himself to be insulted without becoming angry. One who knows what insults are deadly and those that are not. For the first time since her brother was slain, she considered what it meant for Kyle Thorburn's family when he died. What do you know of what happened that day? She asked Ranulf. His brow lifted as he glanced at her. When your brother died? Yes. Before he could answer, the thunder of hooves sounded from behind them. Ranulf, Duke's men, a few miles behind. Catrin smiled. Did I not tell you so? Perhaps if you give up now, my father will be merciful. Ah, lass, Ranulf said, putting spurs to his black horse. Your da is nae match for your coursers. Striking a fast gallop over the moors, crossing small streams, Ranulf led his band, keeping Catrin's horse tight to his leg further and further north. Despair filled her, she twisted in the saddle, trying to see her father's men riding hard behind. If we cross into Scotland, I am dead. She had heard the tales and legends of what the Scots did to their captives. Torture, rape, a slow and agonizing death awaited those unlucky enough to fall into the hands of these savages. While Ranulf seemed more civilized, she knew his need for revenge would not rest until he slaked his thirst in her blood. Chapter 2. Exhausted, sweating, his aching joints unable to keep him upright in the saddle, Henry Waterford, the 3rd Duke of Whitewood, reined in his horse at the top of a hill. His men-at-arms also halted their horses, a long line of mounted men trailing behind. Panting, He waved for the commander of his soldiers, Sir Alban Howard, to ride up beside him. "Your Grace," Sir Alban said, bowing in the saddle. "Are you well?" "No, I bloody well am not," he snapped, trying to catch his breath. "Ride on, catch the bloody buggers who took Catrin. I am only slowing you down." Reining his horse back down the hill, Henry watched as Sir Alban organised a guard of 10 to remain with him, then shouted for the rest to follow him. Hooves thundered over the moors as the mass of mounted retainers galloped over the hilltop and rode north. Lifting his leg over the cantle, Henry almost fell from his horse, even as one of his men dismounted to help him. With his hand on the sturdy man's shoulder, he limped over to a nearby rock to sit down. "Water," he gasped. Hurrying to his saddle, the man-at-arms lifted his leather water bottle down from his pommel, then brought it back to his duke. Henry drank the cool water down, feeling a little strength return to his body. However, the pain in his joints failed to recede, even off the horse, and his exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. "Bloody cowards," he muttered, his weakened body trembling. "You will not escape with her. Oh, Catrin." Still swamped by grief at the brutal death of his son Henry, the Duke could not imagine losing Catrin too. Still, if the thieving cowards crossed into Scotland, he knew the odds of never seeing her again rose to incredible proportions. The Scots, all of them ruthless and bloodthirsty bastards, would no doubt take their time in killing her. He was certain who was behind this atrocity: the Thorburn clan. He glanced up at the sun. Nearly noon. He had assembled his soldiers the instant her guard returned to report Lady Catrin had been taken by Scottish arms men, and ordered her bodyguards imprisoned. When he had time, he would deal with them. "Bloody cowards," he repeated, thinking of the men who failed to keep his daughter safe. Mentally planning their very painful execution, he watched the north, waiting, praying, hoping to see Sir Alban riding back triumphant. Catrin returned, the Scots slain. Hours passed as he sweated under the torturous sun, nibbling on travel rations from his saddlebags. Henry watched and waited. His men lounged near their mounts, keeping a wary eye on the moors around them, while talking in low tones. At last, he heard the sound of galloping hooves and stood, his backside aching from the hard rock he sat upon. Hopeful, he searched the band of riders, expecting to see Catrin among them. She was not. Sir Alban reined in and dismounted to bow. "Your Grace, the villains crossed the border with Lady Catrin. We dared not follow." Henry cursed bitterly. "They will kill her now." "Perhaps not. Ranulf Thorburn is said to be an honourable man. He may not have taken her to kill her, but to keep her from you. If he wanted his revenge by her death, why did he not kill her when he caught her?" A tendril of hope wormed its way into the Duke's heart. "Perhaps you are right. If you are, there may be ways I can get her back." "Exactly, Your Grace." Henry limped toward his horse. "Help me up." Sir Alban bent and laced his fingers together, offering them as a stirrup for the Duke to step into. Once he had his liege lord's weight in them, he heaved the Duke up and into his saddle. Henry sat atop his mount, breathing hard, his eyes closed. "Your Grace," Sir Alban said, his tone uneasy, worried. "Perhaps we should construct a litter for you?" Henry's eyes opened. "No, my friend, I will be all right. Let us return to the castle." Vaulting into his own saddle, Sir Alban rode at his liege's side. His horse, already tired, was happy to make a slower pace. Henry felt his eyes on him, his hand ready to steady the Duke as they rode should he need it. The soldiers rode in a long line behind them, their usual chatter quiet and subdued. "Are you going to execute those men, Your Grace?" Sir Alban asked. Henry eyed him sidelong, breathing hard, sweating. "Should I not?" They were outnumbered, at least 15 to 2, Sir Alban said. Had they rushed into battle for Lady Catrin, they would have died. She still would have been kidnapped, and you would not now know what happened to her. So, you are asking me to spare them. They ran like cowards. So would any sensible man when faced with such odds stacked against them. Would you? Sir Alban grinned. Faster than they did. Henry grunted. You have never run from a fight in your life. All I am saying is that they do not deserve to be executed for this, Sir Alban went on. Demote them, punish them, but do not kill them. I know those two. They are loyal to their bones, and if I know Lady Catrin, she commanded they ride at a distance from her. Henry cursed under his breath. I have told her hundreds of times to stop that idiotic behaviour. The men are there to protect her, and if they are not, they cannot do their jobs. Precisely my point, Your Grace, Sir Alban said. So, you are diverting my rage so I do not execute them. Is that it? Is it working? Bloody hell, yes. Consider me diverted. You dole out whatever suitable punishment you believe they deserve. Thank you, Your Grace. Full night had fallen by the time Henry, Sir Alban, and the soldiers returned to his castle, Castle Linfield. Dogs barked from their kennels as they trotted into the bailey, grooms and pages rushing out to take horses from Henry and Sir Alban. Henry kept the groan behind his clenched teeth as he slid down from his saddle. He held on to Sir Alban with a tight grip, even as the knight shouted for Henry's personal physician. Your Grace, perhaps we can carry you. Shaking his head, Henry grimly limped across the rush and straw-strewn bailey toward the postern doors, his men unsaddling their mounts and leading them into the stables to care for them. Servants in plain homespun wool bowed him through into the castle, waiting to serve him his supper or pour his wine. Torches flared in sconces as he carefully made his way up the stairs to his chambers, leaning heavily on Sir Alban's arm. His personal manservant, James Irwin, helped him to undress and slide under the covers of his bed. Henry sighed, his eyes shut, wondering if he had strength enough to eat. As his physician hurried in and Sir Alban bowed, planning to leave, Henry grasped the knight's arm, restraining him. Opening his eyes, he looked up. In the town of Linfield there is a tavern. It is called the Lucky Hog. Dreadful sort of place. And find a man who goes by the name of Black Charlie, Henry said, his voice trembling with exhaustion and pain. He frequents there. Come morning, I want to see him. Sir Alban frowned. I think I know what you are planning, Your Grace. Are you sure asking the help of brigands is a wise thing to do? There are other ways we can get Lady Catrin back rather than use those black hearts. They can cross into Scotland, Henry replied wearily. He closed his eyes. I cannot. They can kill Thorburn and bring Catrin back to me. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. After sleeping with the aid of one of his physician's tinctures, Henry felt stronger and rose from his bed well after dawn. Though still shaky and his joints still feeling as though sand had gotten into them, he broke his fast with a hearty appetite. Upon asking, he learned that Sir Alban had left for the town of Linfield and had not yet returned. Most excellent. Send him here to my quarters the instant he returns. The sun shone bright and warm through his windows as Henry sat in a chair in the midst of the rays, soaking them up and feeling the pain in his joints ease. Wearing a loose robe over his dressing gown, he dozed, waking occasionally to glance out the window and into the bailey below. Thus, he happened to observe Sir Alban returning with a tall, lanky man in a black cloak with the hood obscuring his face. The man in black rode a bay as rangy as himself. "James!" Henry called. "I must get dressed." Freshly washed and dressed, Henry returned to his chair by the window. He did not wait long. Within minutes, his manservant returned to announce Sir Alban. "Bring them in." Henry stood, albeit shakily, his hands behind his back to hide their tremor. wearing his black and silver tunic embossed with his coat of arms, hose and his sword and a dagger in their sheaths. He watched as Sir Alban and Black Charlie arrived to bow low. "Your Grace," Sir Alban intoned formally, "Black Charlie is here at your request." The tall man flipped back the hood of his long cloak. "Your Grace," he said with a tight smile, "it has been a long time since we met last." Though he was a criminal and a blackguard, Charlie spoke with the accent and intonations of an aristocrat. Henry always suspected he was the second or third son of a nobleman who eschewed the more respectable means of making a living. A short, puckered scar lay across his left cheek. His shaggy black hair tumbled over his shoulders and brow. Bright blue eyes gleamed from his swarthy face, while his insolent half-smile remained in place. "Yes, it has," Henry replied, keeping his tone neutral. "I wish to engage your services, Master Charlie." "Would you, now?" He stroked his short dark beard as he paced slowly around the chamber, eyeing the tapestries as though evaluating their worth. "I must tell you, my prices have gone up. Too many expenditures." When Sir Alban's face darkened and he would have ordered the brigand to stand motionless and face the Duke with proper respect, Henry gestured for him to remain still. "This task I have for you will pay quite handsomely, I assure you." Charlie stopped and faced him. "What is the task, if I may inquire? You might recall that the higher the danger levels, the higher the cost." Henry curled his lip. "I remember. My daughter, the Lady Catrin, has been kidnapped by Scotsmen. I want her back." Charlie whistled low. "This will cost you, indeed." His hands still clasped behind his back, Henry paced slowly around the brigand. "I want my daughter returned to me unharmed, untouched, and her kidnapper slain. You will bring me his head as proof. For all this, I am willing to pay you 100 gold crowns. Who took her? Ranulf Thorburn." Charlie's eyes widened. He stroked his beard, watching Henry as he paced. "That will not be easy. He is the clan Laird now that the old one renounced his chieftainship. That is why I am paying you more than triple your usual rates." Henry noticed Sir Alban's brows hike at his statement, and knew the knight wondered how a duke would know the brigand so intimately. "Will you undertake this task, or shall I find another?" Charlie stiffened. "I will do it, your grace, for twice that." Henry gestured for him to leave. "Thank you for your visit. I know of several others who will leap at this chance to earn 100 crowns. Charlie did not move, and his blue eyes glittered with something akin to hate. "You asked me here first because you know I am the best, Duke. No one else can get your daughter back with Thorburn's head on a pike." Henry merely stood, waiting, patient, knowing his man and his greed. Charlie would pay his men a single crown each and hoard the rest, making him a very rich man. 100, he said slowly, his eyes never leaving Charlie's. "Another 25 as a bonus if you return her within the week." "Done!" Charlie spat on the palm of his right hand and held it out. Henry spat on his own, and the two clasped hands. "Ride hard and fast," Henry said. "I have no idea how long Thorburn might keep her alive." "She may be dead already," Charlie commented, his tone dry. "If so, you receive nothing. Now go." Dismissed, Charlie offered a short, sardonic bow, then spun on his heel and left the chamber. Henry walked to the window, staring down. Within several minutes, Charlie reappeared, his hood covering his head. Mounting his horse, he galloped out of the bailey and down the hill to vanish. "Your Grace," Sir Alban said, standing beside him to also stare down, "I understand why you are doing this, but are you certain this is the only way?" "For Ranulf to die and Catrin to return, yes," Henry replied, his voice soft. "He could keep her for a while before killing her, or torture her, rape her. I must get her home before that happens, Sir Alban. She is all I have left. Chapter 3. Stars glittered in the night sky as a wolf howled far away across the moors. Ranulf cocked his head at the sound, the heat of the fire licking his face and hands, and glanced at his captive. Lady Catrin sat on the ground, her legs crossed, her hands bound in front of her and resting in her lap. She made no indication the beast's howling disturbed her, her gaze on the fire reflective as though pondering philosophy. By long habit, Ranulf stood to inspect the area around their camp, gazing past the small ring of campfires to the darkness beyond. 2 of his clansmen stood watch several hundred paces away, their vision unimpeded by the firelight as they stared outward. He stiffened at the sound of hoofbeats trotting toward the camp, but when the watchman gave the newcomer no challenge, he relaxed. Only dimly lit by the campfires, his closest friend, Aswin Campbell, entered the camp and dismounted at the horse lines. That told Ranulf he had found nothing important in his ride back toward the English border. He would care for his courser before reporting to Ranulf. Ranulf sat back down, observing Lady Catrin watching him. "You'd best get your rest, me lady," he said. "We do be having a long ride on the morrow." She shook her head, her rich auburn locks tumbling over her shoulders to her hips, glowing a deep red in the light of the fire. "How can I sleep when you will likely murder me the moment I do?" "Hood, I wanted you dead, lassie. I ha' already done the deed. I nae need to wait until you're sleeping." "But you are planning to kill me, are you not? Why do you not just get it over with?" Ranulf gazed at the flickering flames. "Revenge do be a twisty road to follow. I ha' nae wish to slay ye, but someone must pay for me brother's death. Your da took me brother, so I took his daughter." Catrin also gazed into the fire, nibbling her lower lip. "What do you know of what happened? I mean, you were not there, so how do you know your brother is innocent?"
Before we continue into the story, do us a favour. Like this video and hit the subscribe button because it helps very much with YouTube's algorithm. If you want the audiobooks ads free, visit our website and select our bundles to save more. Thank you again. Now back to our story.
"'Cause I know me brother," Ranulf answered simply. "He canny murder in cold blood, lassie. Aye, he went sooth to raid your da's cattle, but dinna." "How do you know? Raiding cattle is also a hanging offence in England." "His friends do return with news of what happened. Me brother never raided the cattle, never met your brother. He be in the town of Linfield when your brother's body be found atone the moors. Your da seized him, hanged him without proof 'cause he be a Scot, and me, da's heir." "My father would not hang a man without evidence." Ranulf's brow rose. "And your da canny be hasty in the heat o' grief. My da lies abed, a broken man, 'cause his son and heir be hanged by a Sassenach duke. Kyle be a guide man, a man o' honour, who would nae murder for nae reason, ne'er in cold blood. 'Tis said your brother was killed with ne'er a fight, his throat slit." Catrin nodded. "Yes, that much is true. He was in Linfield and was heard quarrelling with a man. Then he vanished, and his body found on the moors the next day." "And you'd ha' blamed me brother," Ranulf went on. "Kyle wouldna kill over a quarrel, lass. Even if he was insulted? Enraged?" "Aye," Ranulf said, his tone neutral, "in an open battle with plenty of witnesses." Aswin returned from the darkness, offering his laird a quick half-salute. "The Sassenach turned back at the border, Ranulf," he said, squatting on his heels at the fire. He offered Catrin a respectful nod of greeting and went on, "And I saw nothing else to concern us." "Good lad," Ranulf replied, clapping him on the arm. "We must get our rest this night, as we had a longish ride on the morrow." Rising from his squatted position, Aswin nodded and saluted again. then went to another fire where he had set his blankets. All around the fires the clansmen rolled themselves into theirs, their snores resounding through the darkness. Ranulf tossed more wood on his fire, sparks rising on the smoke. Picking up a rope, he went to Catrin. "Forgive the necessity, milady," he said, "but I must be tying your ankles. I would nae want ye roaming about the moors without me." "That is hardly necessary," Catrin protested. "You have men on guard, so how far can I go without being seen?" Ranulf gazed down at her. "I wish, so I dae, that I can trust ye nae tae run. But ye be a clever and brave lass, and I cannae take the chance ye will escape me." Kneeling beside her, he gestured for her feet. Casting him a glare, Catrin unfolded her legs and permitted him to lash her ankles together. "That would take ye a long while to undo," he said, stepping back and retrieving thick wool blankets. "Ye cannae accomplish it without waking me." He lay a blanket on the ground and encouraged her to lie on it. When she complied, he covered her with the other. Catrin folded her arms under her head, watching him as he walked back to his side of the fire and sat down. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "I dinna make war on women's and bairns," he answered, his voice quiet. "It not be your fault, ye'd be a murdering scoundrel, and I dinna wish ye harm, unless I must." "So, you will be kind to me until it is time to torture and kill me?" Catrin said, her voice dripping ice. "Is that it? Ne'er torture. Kill, perhaps, if I must. But should I need to do that, then I be merciful." "I had no idea Scotsmen had anything remotely akin to mercy." Ranulf rolled himself into his pallet of blankets, then propped his head up on his arm, gazing across the fire at her with sorrow. "Ach, lassie, there be so much ye might learn about us Scots that ye dinna know. Just remember, ye Sassenach people be as bloodthirsty and unmerciful as any heathen. Rest ye well this night." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next morning dawned, but without the warm sunlight of the previous day. The freshening wind over the moors hinted at rain to follow, and the low, misty clouds hung over the taller peaks. After a cold breakfast of dried meat, apples, cheese, and hard black bread, Ranulf set Lady Catrin in her saddle. Rather than roll her blankets and tie them to her cantle, he threw one over her shoulders and tucked it around her. She gazed down at him with questioning, honey-brown eyes, but did not speak to thank him. His clansmen saddled their horses while chewing their food, tossing bawdy jokes to one another, and kicked dirt over the fires. Thus, just after dawn, Ranulf vaulted atop his own horse, and pulled Catrin's grey in beside him. Whether due to the dreary morning or her animosity toward him, she refused to speak even as he tried to make conversation. The morning waned into early afternoon when one of his two outriders, riding a few miles ahead, returned to the group at a gallop. Ranulf lifted his fist to his men behind to halt, recognising that trouble lay ahead of them. Catrin said nothing, her bound hands holding the blanket tightly around her. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of a sleepless night, and her rich hair hung lank around her shoulders. The outrider, Neil, reined in sharply, his mount's jaws opening in protest under his haul on the bit. "A band of riders, Ranulf," he said, saluting. 7 of them." "Did ye see a banner?" Ranulf asked. "Who might they be?" "I cannae be certain, but I think the leader be the Sassenach Earl of Hargrove." Ranulf glanced at Catrin in time to see her stiffen. "Where be Lundy?" "Watchin'," he answered. "Hiding about 2 miles ahead." "Show us." Keeping Catrin's grey snugged close to his knee, Ranulf picked up the pace, striking a heavy canter. Catrin held on to the pommel of her saddle, the wind of their passing whipping her hair behind her. Ranulf thought to question her about what she knew of Gilbert Mulvaney, the Earl of Hargrove, but decided against it. What he knew about the man was enough to know he was dangerous and treacherous, even for a Sassenach. Ranulf recalled his own encounters with the Earl. The past year, he had raided the Earl's estate and stolen a small herd of fine breeding horses. Predictably enraged, Gilbert Mulvaney gave chase, but Ranulf hid them in the Highland moors under the protection of a few loyal clansmen. Gilbert, unable to prove it was Ranulf who took them, gave up after his 6 legal days of trying to find them. Yet, not after threatening to slay every Thorburn clansman in Scotland. The second came at a higher cost, when, a few months after his prized horses were stolen, Gilbert and a band of his retainers attacked as Ranulf and his brother Kyle rode toward their home, Dorford Castle. Gilbert gave no warning, and Ranulf and Kyle were caught off guard. But they fought hard, and sent Gilbert packing with a deep wound in his shoulder and 3 dead men behind him. "This might get bloody," Ranulf told Catrin as they approached the spot where his man Lundy sat his horse and watched northeast. Catrin said nothing as Ranulf signalled for Aswin to ride up alongside him. Though he pitched his voice low, he knew she could hear him easily. "Guard Lady Catrin with your life, Aswin," he said. "If there be fighting, keep her safe. Do you hear?" "I will. And if I be killed, take her home to her da." At that last order, Catrin looked at him. Her lips parted. Ranulf gave her a grin and a shrug. "If I be slain, lassie, me revenge dies with me." Handing the rein of the grey gelding to Aswin, Ranulf nudged his horse up the short incline to where Lundy still sat, watching as the riders in the distance trotted closer. His clansman glanced at him, then jerked his chin at the approaching band. "Gilbert, a huss for Hargrove." Sure enough, as Ranulf peered closer, he recognised the Earl on a flashy piebald. Even if the Earl's face was yet indistinct, the horse was not. He half turned in his saddle. "Donal, stay where Oswin and the lady. The rest of ye come with me." Nudging his black gelding into a canter down the small hill, his band behind him, he closed the distance. Gilbert of Hargrove slowed his pace, his fist raised to also halt his retainers. Ranulf loosened his sword in its sheath, tensing himself for a fight. While he hoped such might be avoided, he also knew Gilbert looked for trouble the way a bear searched for berries. "Ah, so it is you, Thorburn," Gilbert called as he reined his horse in 100 yards away from Ranulf and his clansmen. "Been south of the border stealing horses again? Ye been ambushing innocent Scots again, Hargrove?" "There is no such thing as an innocent Scot." Wearing light chainmail, with a tunic embossed with his emblem on the chest, Gilbert sat squat in his saddle. Not a tall man, he was nonetheless broad-chested and a natural fighter. His short blonde hair seemed to have defied a comb and stuck up in all directions, while his heavily beringed right hand rested on his sword hilt. Sunken blue eyes glared hard at Ranulf, his lips thin to bare his teeth. "I outnumber ye, Hargrove," Ranulf said. "Remember your foolishness, and ye be on me turf ne'er your own. I am nae looking for a fight, but I be giving ye a guide one if ye dinna give me the road." Gilbert sneered. "I am an earl. You give me the road." Ranulf chuckled. "I am a laird, an earl and clan chief. Ye wish to spend the day tossing titles about? Ye be in Scotland, ye stonking shite, and Sassenach give way to Scotsmen." Gilbert's face darkened with rage. "How dare you insult me, you insolent ass?" His gaze flicked past Ranulf, and his eyes widened. His jaw went slack. "That is Lady Catrin Waterford," he said. "Just what is Whitewood's daughter doing with the likes of you? That be none o' your business." "You kidnapped her." Ranulf shrugged lazily, grinning. "Not much you can do about it either." "Like hell," Gilbert snarled, yanking his sword from its sheath. "I will kill you and take her home, you bastard." "Ah, man, me parents be wed before the Archbishop." With a screaming challenge, Gilbert kicked his piebald into a gallop. his sword held over his head with both hands. His 6 men, swords high, charged forward on his heels, yelling for all they were worth. Ranulf drew his own and spurred his horse into a run. "Wi' me, lads!" he yelled. "For Scotland!" His men, in a tight bunch behind him and to either side, screamed their own battle cries as Ranulf made Gilbert his target. His black horse, battle-trained and experienced, answered to his knees. When Gilbert's piebald was within 3 strides of him, the black reared, striking at the other horse's head and neck with hooves and teeth. Forced to the side, the piebald slipped, stumbling as Ranulf's sword struck Gilbert's. All around him, his clansmen engaged Gilbert's retainers, striking against swords and shields, slicing at faces and necks, driving past their guard, hacking and stabbing. Gritting his teeth in a feral snarl, Ranulf hewed at Gilbert, beating at his sword in hard, fast strokes, wearing the other man down. He forced his blade past his enemies, slicing into the mail covering Gilbert's shoulder. Crying out in pain and rage, Gilbert's riposte forced Ranulf's blade aside, and he lunged forward. Ranulf spurred his horse into a sideways dance, and the sword missed. Knocking it aside, Ranulf whipped his sword in a 2-handed arc while at the same time squeezing his knees. The gelding climbed high, hooves lashing at the piebald. Gilbert's mount tried to duck away but was not quick enough. The flat of Ranulf's blade struck Gilbert across his shoulders, knocking him from his saddle. He lost his grip on his sword as he fell, tumbling headlong into the heather and rocks of the moors. Leaping from his own, Ranulf planted his foot on Gilbert's chest, the tip of his sword at his throat. Gilbert, his mouth twisted in pain and rage, glared up at him panting. Glancing around, Ranulf found his clansmen all still mounted, swarming over the last 2 of Gilbert's men. 4 lay on the ground, bleeding from rents in their mail, gore oozing from 2 slit throats. 2 others lay on the ground, moaning, holding their bleeding heads as clansmen eyed them sourly. Ian spat on one of them. "Hold!" Ranulf bellowed. "Your Laird be doon. Give up your arms." The 2 Sassenach retainers instantly threw their swords to the ground and held up their hands in surrender. Herding them like sheep, Ranulf's men drove them toward the others on the ground. There, they kept them hedged in by their sweating mounts as the 2 injured men tried to rise. Ranulf grinned down at Gilbert. "Nay, tell me your plans to take the lassie from me custody, laddie." Gilbert squirmed, glaring, but made no other move with the sword nicking the flesh of his throat. "You will start a war, you stupid fool." "'Tis the lassie's da to start it," Ranulf replied, "when he did murder me brother." "Your brother was a cold-blooded killer." "Nay," Ranulf said, his voice cold as his sword dug deeper into Gilbert's skin. A thin trickle of blood streamed from his throat to pool on the soil beneath him. "Ye best be watching your tongue, lad, else me blade might just slip. Ye dinna wish that, for you have another mouth just sooth of the first. Killing me will not change the facts." "Perhaps nay," Ranulf admitted, leaning over his victim. "However, it will gie me satisfaction to kill ye for insulting me brother's blessed memory." Shutting his teeth, Gilbert glared up. "If you are going to kill me, then get it done with." "Ah, but I be enjoying the sight o' ye squirming under me boot. Ranulf." Glancing up, he found Aswin and Donal, Catrin between them, riding up close. "We must be riding," Aswin said. "Either kill him or leave him be." Nodding, Ranulf stepped off Gilbert's chest. "Word o' advice, Hargrove," he said. "Keep your arse sooth o' the border." Before Gilbert could rise, Ranulf reversed his blade and hit him hard on the side of his head with the hilt of his sword. His eyes rolling back into his skull, Gilbert sank back to the soil, unconscious. "Ye be right, lad," Ranulf remarked, stepping away from the man on the ground. "We need tae ride." Feeling Catrin's honey-brown eyes on him, Ranulf sheathed his sword, then caught his black gelding. Swinging up into his saddle, he eyed her sidelong as he took back the reins of her grey. His clansmen reined their horses away from the wounded men, and the retainers still mounted. They, with swift, worried glances at the Scotsmen, jumped down from their horses and hurried to their liege lord. "He be just fine," Ranulf told them, nudging his horse into a walk past them. Catrin once more at his knee. "Care for your chums, nay." Breaking into a swift trot, Ranulf glanced behind, checking his men over for any obvious wounds. Satisfied his clansmen had few, if any, injuries, he glanced at Catrin and found her still watching him. "Why did you not kill him?" she asked. Ranulf shrugged. "I beat him, humiliated him. 'Tis enough. If I kill him, his blood kin can declare a feud." "I see." Expecting more from her than that, he eyed her curiously. "You dinna wish me to nae kill him?" "I never said that. I simply thought all Scots were murderers and thieves." "And no." "You are all still murderers and thieves as far as I am concerned." Ranulf guffawed. "Ah, lassie, you must spend a bit of time in the Highlands. Such beauty to behold, the lochs and streams, the grazing sheep, the tall mountains. My people love this land and are willing to die to keep it free from Sassenach rule. If that makes us murderers, then we are." Catrin shunted her eyes from his and stared straight ahead as Ranulf nudged his horse into a canter. "Then, perhaps all Scotsmen should die." Chapter 4. Castle Dorford stood upon a tall hill overlooking a broad lake, a line of hills guarding its rear. Though not a warrior, Catrin immediately saw the advantages of its position in war. No enemy could approach unseen, and the rocky pinnacle made capturing it a near impossibility. Ranulf reined in atop a hill, the castle appearing misty from the distance. Despite her emotional depression and feeling of hopelessness, she found the region stunningly beautiful. "Home!" Catrin glanced at her captor, who gazed at the distant castle with pride and reverence. As though feeling her eyes on him, Ranulf glanced down at her. "Yes, as well, lassie." "This will never be my home," she replied tartly. "A prison, perhaps." He shrugged. "Call it what you will, but here ye remain for the time being." The drawbridge across the wide moat stood lowered, and the horses' hooves clopped hollowly on the wood as they passed under the barbican and into the bailey. Much like her father's bailey, it was filled with activity. Chickens ran underfoot, pecking and scratching in the rushes. Dogs ran loose, barking as women washed clothes and children chased one another. Wagons filled with hay stood near the stables while men-at-arms practiced their sword fighting. Grooms ran from the barns to take his and Catrin's mounts, while his men dismounted and led theirs inside. Ranulf helped Catrin down from her gelding and pulled his dagger from its sheath. With a single stroke, he cut the leather straps binding her hands together. "Do you expect me to thank you?" she asked, rubbing her wrists to ease the pain. "Nay, lass," he replied, nodding to the grooms who took their horses and led them away. "I expect nothing from ye save your scorn, but ye will be well treated here, my word, own it." Taking her by the arm, not hard, or with a tight grip, he steered her toward the doors that led into the castle. "I will gie ye maids to tend to your needs, and fresh gowns to clad your body. Ye may walk freely within these walls, but know this, lassie." Pausing, Ranulf gazed earnestly into her eyes. "I hae loyal men on the walls wi' orders to shoot ye should ye try to escape. Aye, they know your face, lassie, and if ye do escape, there be nothing atween this castle and the border. Ye will surely die in the Highlands." "That is far better than staying here with you as your prisoner." Catrin yanked her arm from his light grasp. "Never touch me again." Ranulf grinned at her defiance. Holding his hands up in surrender, he said, "Aye, ye do be a feisty one, milady. Come on, I wish ye to meet somebody." Gesturing grandly for Catrin to precede him, Catrin walked toward the doors. Pikemen guarded them, offering Ranulf deferential nods, and eyed Catrin curiously as they passed. As in her father's castle, the stone walls were covered in tapestries. Scenes of hawking, hunting, and warfare were depicted on them, and appeared to be very old. Like the bailey, servant women went about their business as male servants hurried on their errands. Rushes covered the stone floor as hounds nosed within them for scraps. Ranulf guided her up a wide staircase, the walls above her head filled with murder holes, where archers might fire down upon an enemy if they managed to get that far. Though daylight, lit torches and rushlights burned, giving off faint smoke. Rather than abase themselves as her father's servants did, the Scottish servants offered their clan chief respectful nods and smiles of greeting as Ranulf passed. "Do they not respect you?" she asked him. Ranulf glanced at the latest servant, who offered him a quick nod rather than a bow. "Who? My people?" "Yes." "Of course they do." Catrin sighed, not understanding this apparent social equality among the Scottish clans. While in England a servant bowed or curtsied to their betters, she half wondered if they knelt to their king, as did the English when meeting the English king. "Just who am I to meet?" she asked. Da. Catrin hesitated on the step, gazing up at him as he halted and turned back toward her. "Why?" "Ye be me guest, lassie," he said, his tone grave. "It be disrespectful to nae introduce ye to me ancestor, me da." "Very well." They continued to walk up the stairs, until arriving at a round tower built into the castle's wall. "This be the Laird's tower," he explained. "I live in here, as does Mida. I had quarters here for ye as well nigh comfortable and appointed. I will show them to ye in a bit." This tower was also guarded by men with pikes as well as swords sheathed at their belts. Their brigandines held the emblem of a black raven, what Catrin assumed was the badge of Ranulf's house. The guards nodded as they passed, and another set of stairs greeted her eyes. Yet this climb proved shorter, and within moments Ranulf knocked at a solid oaken door. No one called for them to enter. Catrin thought Ranulf would turn back, but instead he opened the door and walked in. "Da?" The place was dark, gloomy in spite of the sunlight outside. A sullen fire burned on the hearth, giving off smoke and little light. A figure in a broad chair covered in red deer hide stirred, and stood. "Kyle, that your son?" Ranulf grimaced. "Nay, da, it be Ranulf." Catrin watched with cautious confusion as a tall man with shaggy reddish hair stumbled towards them. She suspected he had once been a strong and robust man, a warrior, but now appeared helpless and almost childlike. Scars roamed his hands and once powerful arms, and not a few crossed his grizzled features. His pale blue eyes and his sunken face appeared lost and baffled, and despite herself, Catrin felt pity for him. "Da, we ha' a guest." His gesture indicated Catrin, who offered him a quick curtsy. "Greetings to you, my lord. Me lady, this be my da, Laird Angus Thorburn." A guest? "Aye, da, she be Lady Catrin Waterford, daughter o' the Duke o' Whitewood." Expecting the older man to lash out with hatred and anger at the mention of her name, Catrin braced herself. Yet no such explosion of fury came. Laird Angus gently took her hand and patted it, still seemingly lost in his own thoughts. "Aye, be welcome, lass," he murmured, yet without a smile. "Hae you met me son Kyle, me lady? He be along shortly, to be sure. Ranulf, lad, where be your brother?" Catrin turned her face from the pain in Ranulf's expression, in his hazel green eyes. Her throat thickened without her consent, and she recalled her own grief when her brother, Henry, had been discovered amongst the rocks and heather. Dead, his throat sliced from ear to ear, he lay staring at the sky, his eyes filmed over. Her father, almost inconsolable in his grief, had retreated to his bed and only emerged for Henry's funeral. "Da," Ranulf said, swallowing hard. "Kyle be on a long trip, dinna ye remember? He may be back for a time." Catrin glanced sharply at him, opening her mouth until she caught his warning glance and gave him a single tiny nod of acquiescence. Laird Angus, caught in the illusion his son was not dead, did not deserve to hear that Kyle was in truth dead. Not from her. He may be a hated and despised Scot, but he was obviously now a broken man. Her father had remained in his chambers for weeks after Henry's death before finally emerging, a changed man. The laird's wandering gaze rested on her. "What a bonny lass ye be," he murmured. "Are ye here to marry me, lad Ranulf? He be a good lad, he be." Almost choking, Catrin tried to smile. "Ah, no, Laird, I'm just visiting." He chuckled and gently touched her cheek with his finger. "Ah, ye will marry me, lad, so ye will. I hae the sight, so I dae." "The sight?" Ranulf nodded, his own brows hiked. "Aye, me lady, we Scots are often bestowed with the gift o' sight. Me da be one such." I had no idea," Catrin stammered. "Is this passed down from parent to child?" "Aye, so 'tis, but I nae hae it nor Kyle." Ranulf paused a moment. "But I see ghosts, and the she." "Shit?" Ranulf's brows furrowed as he thought, as though trying to find a way to explain something he always took for granted. "The she be fairies, as it were. Some are good and some are evil. I ha' seen the bean neat washing the clothing of those soon to pass." His face lowered and his voice, when he spoke, was almost inaudible. "I ha' also heard the Cowiniag weeping, right before—" Stopping, he swallowed hard, glancing at his father. Clearing his throat, he tried a smile, which to Catrin appeared quite false. "Ach, dear, me lady day be tired. Gie us your blessing and we leave ye to rest." "Aye, lad, I day be feeling me age." His bewildered eyes rested on Catrin, and he offered a weary smile. "Ah, lass, permit me to salute ye as you do to his new daughter." Catrin smiled as the old laird kissed her on both cheeks, then her brow. "Perhaps I may come again to visit you, Laird Angus?" she asked. He smiled. "O' course. Pleased to have a bonny lass visit this old bugger." She curtsied again as Ranulf led her from his father's private chambers. Once the door was closed and he could no longer hear them, she swung on Ranulf. "Do not think for a minute that your father's prophecy will come to pass," she snarled, her voice pitched low. "I hate you, I despise you, and I will die before I marry you." To her surprise, Ranulf shrugged. "Da's sight is nae always dead own," he said. "He has seen things that ne'er come to pass. Just as long as we are clear," she gritted. "Now, where are my quarters? I need a hot bath and a change of clothes." Ranulf bowed low with a quirky smile. "Right this way, me lady." As he had said, her private chambers in the Laird's tower were spacious, clean, and comfortably appointed. A huge bed stood against one wall in the bedchamber, with tables and chairs, as well as tapestries on the walls. Luxurious furs covered the bed and the stone floor, and a hearth large enough to roast a calf or a pig inside lay filled with wood, ready to light. "Whose room was this?" she asked, walking about examining the furnishings. She discovered the window faced north, looking out onto the moors, and the huge lake beyond. Far below her window were barns, sheds, a huge pigsty, wood piles and wagons filled with hay or straw. Clansmen exercised horses on the heath, practicing their warcraft with swords, pikes and lances. "Me moors," Catrin glanced at him. "Is she dead?" Leaning against the door frame, his arms crossed over his chest, Ranulf nodded. "She did pass into heaven when I were a wee lad. I scarcely remember her." Once again, Catrin felt unwanted sympathy rise. She too had lost her mother when she was a little girl, and knew what it was like to lose a parent while very young. Still, she reminded herself that Ranulf and his doddering father were the enemy. Steeling her heart, Catrin closed off the flow of empathy toward both father and son, and considered her own situation. "You said I will have attendants?" "Aye, if you wish, I will fetch them to ye nay." "Yes, please, and remember the bath." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Thus, freshly bathed, her hair washed and brushed, Catrin, with the help of the 2 giggling maids, dressed herself in a pale yellow gown with a matching kirtle of the softest cloth under it. Gazing down at herself, she found the gown slightly too large, but decided it would work for the time being. Given a needle and some thread, she could adjust it to fit her slender frame quite easily. As the maids informed her that Ranulf expected her for supper, she made her way down the stairs, wondering how she would ever find her way around this huge place. As they did, Ranulf, the servants, men-at-arms, and peasants she passed gave her nods of polite greeting and smiles. She found this odd, having grown up with folks bowing and curtsying to her, never speaking to her unless she spoke to them first. A soldier grinned when she asked directions to the dining hall and offered to walk her there himself. At least these boorish heathens have some manners. Ranulf stood at the head of the vast mahogany table, one that could easily fit 50 diners waiting for her. He wore a clean tunic and leather trousers, his belt around his waist carrying only a dagger in its sheath. Over his left breast was the black raven emblem. Catrin glanced around, expecting the old laird. "Will your father be joining us?" He shook his head. "Nay, he rarely leaves his rooms." "Humph." Catrin snorted lightly as he pulled out the chair for her. "I wonder what he would say if he knew you kidnapped me." Ranulf sat down as a servant poured wine into cups. "Ye can try to tell him, lassie, but be warned. He'll ne'er believe ye." "Why ever not?" "Me da sees and believes only what be inside his head. Me brother dying. It took him hard." Catrin sipped her wine, discovering it both heady and delicious, and once again felt the treacherous sympathy rise. With his already poor health, that could have been my father when Henry was killed. "Your words we only serve to confuse him, lass." "So, your father relinquished all his titles to you then?" Nodding, Ranulf clasped his hands together, leaning his elbows on the table. "I do believe he wanted to pass Owen," he said softly. "He, before witnesses, declared me Laird of the Thorburn clan. I didna want any part o' it. I wasna ready." Catrin stared down at the table. "When are any of us ready?" she asked. "I dinna ken," he replied. The servants brought a roasted piglet fresh from the fire, hard cheese, hot black bread, stewed apples, as well as lentils swimming in butter. Catrin did not realise how hungry she was until she scented the delicious odours, and also realised that the Scottish fare was not much different from what she was served at her father's table. Eating with an appetite that equalled Ranulf's, she accepted second helpings and eyed his smile sardonically. "What?" "I do like seeing a lass eat." "I do not know why," she commented dryly. "We must eat like men do." "Perhaps I be enjoying your company then?" Catrin merely shook her head. "As your captive will I be permitted to ride? I do hate being kept indoors." "Perhaps," he said, pushing his plate away and picking up his wine. "In time, should ye behave yourself." Bending her neck in a mocking bow, her eyes on his, she said, "Then I shall do my very best to behave, Laird Ranulf." He grinned. "Ah, keeping ye in line should prove interesting indeed." Her stomach contentedly full, Catrin sipped her wine, watching her captor. "How long do you intend to keep me your prisoner? If you do not intend to kill me, that is." "I dinna ken," he answered. "I intend to prove me brother didn't murder years." "Just how are you going to do that?" We find a way. Nodding, she asked, Then what? You find the real killer if there is one, and then you will let me go? After Yuda bends the knee and begs forgiveness from me, Da. That will never happen. Just as you finding anyone else guilty of killing my brother, because it was your brother who did the filthy deed. Then, me lady, ye shall be spending a very long time in me company. Catrin pushed her chair back and stood. I want to return to my chambers. You will escort me. Ranulf shrugged lazily and also stood. If that be your wish. Do you heathen Scots have books? She asked, walking beside him as he guided her for soul across the castle to the stairway. That is, if you people are not all illiterate. Thinking that this insult might anger him, she waited for his angry riposte. Yet it did not come. Ranulf eyed her sidelong from his tall height, his hazel green eyes amused. Ay, my lady, this castle day hae an extensive library with books and manuscripts. Do you wish me to show it to ye? Perhaps tomorrow, she replied, her tone haughty. But send someone to fetch a few books and bring them to my chamber. I wish to read before bed. Oh, course. Full night had fallen as she closed her door in Ranulf's face and dismissed her maids. A few rushlights burned to illuminate her rooms, and a fire blazed on the hearth. Walking to the window, Catrin leaned on the sill and stared out into the dark. Her previous arrogance and bravado now gone, tears filled her eyes as she realised she might never see her home or her father again. Folding her hands, she bowed her head to pray. Chapter 5. Trying not to wince, Gilbert Mulvaney, the Earl of Hargrove, sat bare-chested in front of a blazing fire on the Scottish moors as one of his knights stitched the wound in his scalp closed. His head aching something fierce, he muttered curses under his breath. The deep laceration in his shoulder from Ranulf's blade had already been sewn, but the pain from both injuries would no doubt keep him awake most of the night. All done, my lord, said Sir John. You should heal with hardly a scar. My thanks, Gilbert said, gingerly touching the closed wound with his fingertips. I do not suppose you have a concoction that might help me sleep this night. Yes, I believe I have a few herbs I can put into your wine. They may help kill your pain. Putting his clothing and chainmail back on, as the night would grow cold on the Highland moors, Gilbert nodded. I would be grateful. As the knight rose to fetch the wine and the promised herbs from his saddlebags, Gilbert gazed into the fire, plotting his next move. With 2 men buried not far away, he had only the 4 survivors of the battle with Ranulf remaining to him, and 2 had been badly injured but would live. Sir John returned with a cup of wine, which he placed close to the fire to warm. Will we be returning to England now, my lord? He asked. We must rescue Lady Catrin from Thorburn's clutches, Gilbert replied, frowning. I cannot simply ride away and leave her to his torments. The knight glanced at the other fire where the remaining 3 men-at-arms spoke in low tones, finishing their supper. With only 5 of us? We have not the choice, Gilbert responded, taking a stick and poking the fire with it. Perhaps if we watch his castle, we can find a way to sneak in and bring her out. No doubt Whitewood will reward us handsomely for bringing her home. Yes, that might be a feasible plan, my lord, Sir John said, nodding. We may find a weakness somewhere and exploit it. We might even don the garments of Scots and simply walk in and fetch her out. I doubt it will be that easy, Gilbert said, picking up the now heated wine and drinking it. The heathen Scots know their own. Our accents alone will mark us as English. Sir John rubbed his chin. I can imitate a Scottish brogue, my lord. If we find a way to get in, I can do the talking. I will keep that in mind, Gilbert replied. I just hope Thorburn has not hurt or killed Lady Catrin already. I did not believe he was the sort of man who would harm an innocent, much less a woman. Gilbert curled his lip. Thorburn is an animal, Sir John. Never forget that. These Highlanders are like rabid dogs and should be put down. All of them. Will King Edward declare war over this, my lord? That I cannot say, Gilbert replied. It depends a great deal on the Duke of Whitewood. If he demands the king take action, it may very well lead to that. Bannockburn was only 4 years ago, Sir John said reflectively. Edward still stings from his defeat. As do I, Gilbert replied, his voice dry. I was there. I lost 10 good men in that battle. I earned my gold spurs there, my lord, Sir John said, fighting on behalf of the Earl of Moulton. Did he perish on the battlefield? Later, of his wounds. After his death, I pledged my loyalty to you. You never told me that. Sir John smiled. I suspect the conversation never came up. No, I suppose it never did. Gilbert yawned, feeling the effects of the warmed wine. As you and George there escaped injury, I would have you two watch through the night. Permit the other two to get their rest. Sir John nodded and rose to bow. I will see to it, my lord. Sleep well. Lying in his pallet of thick blankets, his bared sword next to him, ready to hand, Gilbert closed his eyes and tried to sleep. His pain dulled somewhat. He dozed fitfully through the night, often waking after a nightmare of Ranulf Thorburn's malicious grin and his evil eyes gazing into his own. He woke at dawn, still feeling Thorburn's sword tickling his throat. You will pay for that, you shit, he muttered, unrolling himself from his blankets. After a cold breakfast of dried beef, salted herring, raisins, and a handful of wild nuts, Gilbert led his small band further into Scotland. The pain in his shoulder and head had not abated by much, and his 2 injured retainers, while not complaining, revealed their own hurt in their drawn faces and pale flesh. Let us hope we do not have to fight, he commented to Sir John. We would not survive an attack by a gang of street urchins. I agree, Sir John said, glancing at the battered men riding, slumped in their saddles. While we watch Thorburn's castle, we can rest and heal and make our plans. I do not wish to give ourselves away by entering a village for supplies, Gilbert said, gazing around at the rolling moors. We will have to hunt to keep ourselves fed until we leave this barbaric land. George is quick with his bow, Sir John said. I will have him keep his eye out as we ride. That night, Gilbert and his band dined on a freshly killed red deer buck, and the next day, feeling better and more refreshed, continued north toward the Thorburn hereditary lands. Growing more cautious, Gilbert sent George ahead as an outrider, with instructions to watch for any humans who might see them and report their presence. The last thing we need is for some peasant to report Englishmen this far north, Gilbert said. If you see anyone, report to me immediately. As it happened, no more than 2 hours passed when George returned at a gallop. Over those hills, my lord, he said to Gilbert, bowing in his saddle. A young shepherd and a flock of sheep? We cannot ride past him without being seen. Did you see anyone else? No, my lord. I believe he is quite alone. Good. Gilbert leaned back in his saddle, smiling with satisfaction. Ride within range of your bow and shoot him down. George blanched. In cold blood, my lord. He is nothing but an animal, Gilbert said, scowling. Do you not have the belly to do as your liege lord commands? He is but a youth, my lord, George protested. Give me your bow and quiver, coward, Gilbert snarled. I will remove this paltry peasant myself. Seizing the man's bow and arrows, Gilbert spurred his horse to the top of the ridge, finding the young Scottish shepherd well within range of his shot. Knocking an arrow to the string, he pulled it back to his ear, taking aim. The boy saw him too late, his jaw dropping in shock and terror. Releasing the bowstring, Gilbert saw with satisfaction the arrow strike the boy in the throat. Even at this distance, he heard his last gurgles as he choked to death on his own blood. The flock scattered as the shepherd fell to the ground, bleating, then gathered together again to resume grazing. Turning in his saddle, Gilbert waved to his men. Handing the bow back to George, he gestured toward the flock. "See if your courage will permit you to kill a few sheep," he sneered. Flushing, George bowed and rode down from the ridge. Gilbert found Sir John watching him with something in his eyes that he could not identify. Disgust? Condemnation? "Rabid dogs," he snapped. "All of them!" Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Hidden carefully in the hills above Dorford Castle, Gilbert watched and waited, unable to see any opportunity to sneak into the fortress on its pinnacle. With his men on constant watch in order to remain undiscovered by any Scot peasant or knight or common man at arms, Gilbert tried and rejected many ideas on how to invade the place and bring Lady Catrin out. He saw no sign of her, but did observe the huge numbers of armed men in brigandines, both on horses and afoot, busy patrolling, training or lounging at their ease. As usual, in any nobleman's castle, he watched servants, peasants, yeomen, and merchants coming and going from the castle's walls. The village, whose name Gilbert did not know, lay just west of the great gates, where many folk walked or drove wagons to and from. By the time 3 days had passed without any helpful ideas on how to get inside and bring Lady Catrin out, Gilbert began to think it hopeless. The drawbridge went up every night to come down every morning, but the sheer number of armed men between himself and the Duke of Whitewood's daughter remained daunting. "Might we scale the walls?" Sir John asked, peering down at the castle as the sun set on their third day in hiding, watching. "We might," Gilbert replied, "but I highly doubt Lady Catrin can climb down them. In addition, we do not know where in that bloody rock pile she is." "Perhaps I should leave my weapons here," Sir John said, peering down. "Go in there as a merchant or peasant. Have a look around." Gilbert nodded thoughtfully. "That might be our only opportunity. We are running out of supplies, and the longer we are here, the greater the chance we will be discovered." "Then come first light," Sir John said. "I will enter the village and join a line of wagons. Once inside the castle, I will see if I can locate her. If I get lucky enough to speak to her, maybe I can bring her out right from under Thorburn's nose." "Just do not get yourself killed," Gilbert said. "I need you." Though they lit no fires and ate cold fare, the band took turns watching the darkness. Gilbert had no sooner rolled himself into his blankets to sleep, awaiting his turn when one of his men whistled softly, the signal that someone had been seen. Seizing his sword, Gilbert got to his feet and hurried up the short hill that overlooked Dorford Castle. Crouching next to the man named William North, Gilbert watched and listened. He glanced sidelong at William, who touched his finger to his lips and pointed down and to their right. "Someone is coming," he whispered. "Alone." Chapter 6. Though she took her meals with Ranulf, Catrin spent much of her time wandering the castle and the bailey, trying to find a means to escape. She was treated with respect by all she encountered, but she knew she was watched, and not just by the guards on the high walls that surrounded the castle. She suspected her personal maids reported her every move to Ranulf, and even the peasants from the village, or who worked there, eyed her with the intent of informing the soldiers what she did and when. Despite her hatred of Ranulf, Catrin found herself drawn to his father. Though she felt she betrayed her own father and brother, she liked to seek him out and listen to his tales of the Scottish past. Though he continued to believe his son, Kyle, still lived and travelled afar, the rest of his mind seemed clear, his memory keen. "Ah, for ye to ha' seen it, lassie," he said, his eyes wistful. "Banners bright against the green land, the sunlight, and the spears, the swords. Battle she were at Falkirk when William Wallace raised the heart, Oh, the Scots. But was he not executed for betraying the King of England? She asked. Angus's blue eyes grew sad. Aye, so they did. But a true Scot he was. All through time he would be remembered as a hero. So, you were there? Aye, so I was, lassie, so I was. As she asked questions, Angus told her tales of heroism and gallantry, of death and blood, and her own blood churned at the sound of his voice, the stories sparking her imagination. Never had she thought of the Scottish being so loyal to their own king, how hard they fought for their freedom from English rule, how much they loved their land, just as she loved her own country, felt loyalty to King Edward down to her bones, yet hearing him speak of tremendous feats of daring in battle, she wondered if she misjudged these people by hating them and thinking of them as barbarians. "Tell me about your wife," she said. "Me beautiful Ailsa," he said, smiling as he gazed out the window. "Tall and fair, with hair the colour o' honey. Eyes the colour o' the spring sky. Gave me 2 strong sons, she did." "How did she die?" His eyes grew sad again. "Was the fever. Half the village and the castle took sick, thus she passed and left me alone." "I lost my mother when I was very small," Catrin said also, staring out the window. "I do not know what caused her to die, as my father has refused to tell me." "Ah, lassie," Angus smiled, "she be looking down from heaven on ye." When not with Angus or Ranulf, Catrin walked the bailey, permitted to go into the stable to see her grey gelding and feed him bits of carrot or crusts of bread, but not permitted to take him out. As she stroked his soft nose and felt his warm breath on her hands, she eyed the grooms and watched their routine. Yet she saw no opportunity to steal her horse out from under their noses and ride him out of there. Even if she managed that much, the guards on the walls watched her every move. One night she woke a few hours before dawn and got dressed. Walking out of the castle, she encountered no one. Even the hounds in their kennels slept. Her hope rising, she crept from shadow to shadow, silent, thinking that perhaps the guards on the walls napped at this ungodly hour. Glancing up, she saw no faces staring down at her. All appeared dark and quiet. Not even the calls of hunting owls disturbed the night silence. Turning, she thought to see if perhaps the drawbridge was lowered. She slammed headfirst into the brigandines of a man-at-arms. "Me lady," he offered her a small bow, grinning. "What brings ye out in the wee hours?" Flustered, Catrin fought to find an excuse. "I, could not sleep. I just wanted to take a walk." "Then ye wouldn't mind if I join ye?" "I would mind," she snapped. "I will return to my rooms, alone." Leaving him, she walked quickly back to the castle and her chambers, throwing herself down on the bed and punching her pillow in her frustrated anger. "There has to be a way out of here," she muttered. "There has to be." She discovered her way out shortly after dawn. Peering out her window, she examined the castle's outer stone structure. The tower she resided in was built into the massive wall, and straight down lay freedom. Looking closer, she found that not every stone had been perfectly aligned. If she had courage enough, she might creep like a mouse down the wall to the ground. Once more hope rose in her breast. "I can steal a horse from the village," she told herself, pacing her rooms. "But how can I climb down the wall in a bloody gown?" At breakfast, Ranulf made no comment about her nighttime adventure and meeting the guard, then rose to go about his duties as clan Laird. Venturing out into the bailey again, Catrin studied the men's clothes. "That is what I need right there," she muttered, eyeing the tunics and liennes the men wore. "Now, how to go about stealing some?" That she found easier than she thought as she followed the washerwomen at a discreet distance and discovered where they hung the laundry to dry. Fortunately for her, it was in a part of the castle that only the servants used. Knowing they ate their midday meal together, Catrin lingered until after they left to eat. Grabbing a pair of liens that appeared to be about her size and a dark grey woolen tunic, she hid them under a pile of straw. Then, walking back into sight as though unconcerned she was watched, she waited until after her supper with Ranulf. Once the place grew quiet for the evening, she hurried down from her chamber. The clothes were still where she had left them. Triumph filled her as she took them back to her chambers and changed into them. Only when she peered down into the shadows did she begin to wonder as to her own wisdom. "You are going to kill yourself," she muttered, gazing at the stones she could barely see. "That is one long drop to the ground." Setting her will and determination, Catrin gathered a little food she had collected in case she found a way to escape, and a full leather water bottle. Putting them into a small cloth sack, she tied it to a piece of rope she used for a belt, then climbed out of the window. Stealing her courage, Catrin turned around to face the wall and found the first tiny stone protrusion with her toes. The stones turned out to be more regular than she thought. Using them for hand and footholds, she carefully and slowly climbed down them, using every ounce of strength in her hands and arms. By the time she had gone halfway down, her muscles screamed in agony. Gritting her teeth, she ignored its strident voice and refused to talk aloud to herself in case she was heard. "Keep going. You can do it. I promise. You can rest once you touch the ground." She dared not look down, even if she could not see the bottom in the dark. There was no moon, and clouds scudded across the dim light of the stars. After creeping down the wall for what seemed like an hour, she thought she should be close to the bottom. "I have to know." Hanging on to the incredibly small protrusions that held her entire body's weight, she slowly turned her head to gaze down. She saw nothing. Damn and blast. Taking a deep breath, she went down another few feet. Then another. That was when she missed her foothold. Instead of resting her toes on the rock, she put her weight there and found nothing. Catrin fell. Without time to scream, she thumped to the earth below, about 5 feet down. The drop knocked her breath from her lungs and bruised her backside. But when she shakily stood, she found herself sore but unharmed. Taking a few moments to hide in the shadows and rub her burning arms and legs, she regained her wind and gazed up at the top of the wall. Like the ground had earlier, it vanished into the dark and she saw nothing. If guards heard her, surely they would have raised the alarm by now. Grinning, but not daring to laugh aloud, Catrin began to walk across the heather. Without the moon or the stars to guide her, she had no idea what direction she headed into. But her room faced north, so she thought that if she angled somewhat to her left, she would be close to the village when the sun came up. Walking across the moors, she was free and happy. She would steal food and a horse, then gallop hard south towards the border. Once she crossed into England, she could reveal who she was and obtain an armed escort back home to her father. She knew how to get the most out of a horse, and by riding day and night, she could be home within a few days. Absorbed in these thoughts, Catrin almost failed to see the shapes of men rising out of the heather. Chapter 7. Ranulf woke to the sound of someone pounding on the door to his chambers. His warrior instincts kicking in, he rose, clad only in his small clothes, and seized his sword. "Come," he called. Duncan, one of his retainers who was on guard duty that night, opened the door and rushed in. "Ranulf," he gasped, "the Lady Catrin, she be ut on the moors." "How in the bleeding hell did she do that?" he demanded, shoving his legs into his leans. "She done crawled down the outer wall, she did." Ranulf froze. "She what?" "Aye." Duncan's voice and face expressed his admiration for the lass's pluck. "We didn't see her on the wall, but we caught a glimpse o' her running cross the heather. She be too far to try a shot in the dark and all." "I am rather glad you didn't shoot her," Ranulf admitted, shoving his arms into a tunic. Grabbing his sword belt, he tied it on. I like the lass. Gay, get the horses saddled. I be right doon." Duncan saluted and left, leaving Ranulf to find his boots and lace them around his lower legs. "Crawled down the wall," he chuckled, then burst into laughter. "She a right bonny lass with courage to spare. Pity she be Sassenach. She would make a right guide Scot." Plunging his sword and dagger into their sheaths, Ranulf ran out of his chambers and down the steps. He discovered the bailey teeming with life as his clansmen shouted curses and jokes, saddled horses, and swung aboard their stamping mounts. "Lower the bridge!" Ranulf yelled over the tumult. As the drawbridge slowly clanked downward against the creaking of windlasses, it hit the other side with a hollow boom. Mounted up, Ranulf yelled his clan war cry and kicked his horse into a gallop. With at least 100 men behind him, he rode into the night, racing across the heather. "Which way?" he hollered at Duncan. "North-east." Reining his mount toward the left, he discovered the clouds overhead breaking apart. Starlight shone down, not enough to track her by, but enough to see by. If she topped a low-lying hill, he might be able to see her against the faint light. Watching for any sign of Catrin, he almost failed to hear the faint cry over the thunder of the hooves behind him. Cocking his head, he willed the sound to come again. It did. A woman's scream of rage and pain. "Dinny tooch the lass, wur ye be a dead man." Gritting his teeth to contain his own anger, he urged his horse into an even faster pace. His mount's rear quarters bunched under, bucking with the effort, Ranulf topped the hill and galloped down the far side. His clansmen behind him, the ground shook under the pounding of their horses' hooves. Balancing himself in the saddle as he galloped downhill, Ranulf rode at a dead run, straight into the milling band of about 5 men and a furious woman. "Circle around, lads," he yelled, drawing his sword. Curbing his horse sharply, he felt his mount's rear end slide across the heather, even as his mount's front legs kept running forward. The group of 5 scattered, yelling, running for their horses. His clansmen, over 100 strong, spread out in a wide circle, closing in around the other group, cantering, trotting in a huge circle, their arrows knocked into bowstrings, aiming. Lady Catrin, clear in his sight, rose from her knees as his mount slithered to a halt. A man also rose, cursing audibly, his English accent clear in Ranulf's ear. He knew that voice. He hated that voice. He kicked his horse forward at the same time he yanked on the bit. The horse, caught between 2 adverse commands, reared high, his front hooves flailing. Ranulf heard them strike flesh, and a male's anguished yell of pain. The dark shadow went down. Throwing himself from the saddle, Ranulf knelt on the man's chest, his sword at his throat. "I do swear to God, Hargrove, ye day test me patience." Gilbert of Hargrove writhed under him, bleeding from his nose and mouth, his face swelling clearly in the faint light, and grimaced. "Bloody hell." "That day be where ye be headed, Hargrove," Ranulf commented dryly. "Wet ye day ta the lass." Gilbert grinned, his teeth stained red, and refused to answer. Ranulf glanced up. "Me lady?" Catrin, who had stepped close, unseen, gazed down at them. "It is all right. There is no harm done. He struck me, but I am fine." His rage bubbling just below the surface, Ranulf pressed the edge of his blade against Gilbert's jugular. "One slice, and ye be dancing with the devil in 2 shakes. I day despise a man who hits a lass." "We did not know who it was," Gilbert snapped. "We thought she was a man." Taking a longer look at Catrin, he discovered she wore not a gown, but a man's tunic and liens. He grinned. "That do look good on ye, lassie," he said. Catrin rolled her eyes. "Save it," she snapped. "Now let him go. He is Gilbert, Earl of Hargrove, and you do not handle a man of his stature in such a fashion." Ranulf glanced from Gilbert to Catrin, then back. "Ah, I canny day that, Catrin," he said. He stood and grabbed Gilbert by the neck of his mail and hauled him to his feet. "This Sassenach day be trespassing on me lands. I hang trespassers." Gilbert thrust Ranulf's hands away and tried to wipe his bloody face with his sleeve. "I came to take her home to her father." "I ken what ye be doing, wallops," Ranulf retorted. "Ye still be trespassing." Catrin stepped forward, placing herself between Ranulf and Gilbert. "Let him go," she said, her tone firm. "Let him return to England, and I will remain with you. I will not try to escape again. My sworn oath." Ranulf stared at her, astounded. "Ye would hae me spare his life, lassie? After he hit ye?" "He and his men did not recognise me until afterward," she replied. "Had they known, it would not have happened. Now, will you shake with me? Do we have an agreement?" Catrin spat on her hand and held it out. Ranulf gazed at it, bemused, then looked at a defiant Gilbert. "Yon lady day hae a wee bit o' fire, eh, Gilbert? Ye cannae handle one such. I take her off your hands, then—" "No!" Gilbert glared at him. "Let us both go, and my men. You had no right to take her." "Nay," Ranulf breathed, an inch from Gilbert's swarthy face. "I hae every right. Knew ye best get mounted ere I change me mind. 30 o' me men we accompany ye to the border. Make sure ye gets there safely." Spitting into his own palm, he clasped Catrin's hand. "A right guide decision, me lady. This 'ere be a bad one. Ye ne'er want to get mixed up with the likes o' him." "We have a deal, Ranulf," Catrin said. "Stick to your end of it, and I will mine." "Ye day, lassie," Ranulf said, eyeing Gilbert sidelong. "But ye did the right thing. I dinna think ye would make it to England, with your virtue intact with this one." "The Earl would never harm me." "Ye go and believe in that?" Ranulf turned toward the mass of men and horses still encircling Gilbert and his men. "Duncan, select 30 stout lads to escort Hargrove to the border. Aswin, ye be in charge." Taking Catrin politely by the arm, expecting her to struggle and demand he not touch her, he helped her onto his horse. As his men divided, the 30 selected to take Gilbert of Hargrove to the border ringed him and his men around. Ranulf vaulted up behind Catrin, yet waited and watched as Gilbert, still bleeding and fuming, mounted his piebald. "This be your final warning," Ranulf said to him. "The lassie's protection is for this time only. Next time ye cross into my territory, I will hang ye." For answer, Gilbert curled his lip and spat onto the ground. Thus, herded like sheep, he and his men were then forced to move out. Hooves thudding into the heather, the group galloped down the hill, headed south. Ranulf watched them go, unable to stop himself from wondering if he had made the right decision to let the man go. "Time to get you back to safety," he murmured, leading the way back to the castle. Catrin said nothing. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Though she usually kept to herself or spent time with his father, Catrin remained with him after breaking their fast. Ranulf did not question it and chose to enjoy her company. Her courage in climbing down the treacherous castle wall impressed him greatly. Though she seemed unwilling to talk to him, she hovered close by as he walked among the stables. A commotion at the drawbridge drew his attention. A small crowd of people in the plain homespun woolens of commoners walked across it. 4 men carried something heavy in a blanket, their expressions dark with anger. The wailing of women made him frown and hurry toward them. Catrin followed at his shoulder. As Ranulf closed in on them, other men-at-arms also gathered around as the peasants saw him come and knuckled their brows. "What happened?" he asked, gazing down as the men lowered a corpse to the ground. "He be slain!" wailed a stout woman in a kerchief and dark skirt. Me son, me son." As she keened and wept, Ranulf ground his teeth at the sight of the arrow buried deep in the lad's throat. His once blue eyes glazed over in death, his face starkly white. Blackened, dried blood had pooled on his tunic and flesh. Ranulf gently touched his cold skin, and suspected he had been killed a few days past. "Me lad, Laird," said one of the men who carried the boy in the blanket. "Murdered he was guarding me flocks. Took 3 sheep also." "Shot down?" Ranulf asked, dull fury rising. "Aye, Laird. We went looking for him and found him dead, just as you see him, Nate." Ranulf fingered the fletching on the arrow. "That be a Sassenach arrow." Half turning, he met Catrin's wide and stunned eyes. "Gilbert o' Hargrove done murdered this 'ere lad. What ye say nae to asking me to spare his life?" How can you be sure it was Hargrove?" she asked, glancing from the corpse to his face and back again. "I ken it. I has seen his arrows and treachery afore." Furious, wanting to hit something, Ranulf ran his hands through his thick red hair. "I dae be sorry for your loss," he said to the grieving parents. "I swear to ye noo, I will slay the fiend who did this to your lad." He swung toward Catrin, his eyes boring into hers. "Ye ne'er protect him again, lassie. I dae so swear." "If you are right," she said slowly, "and Gilbert is guilty of this heinous deed, then he should hang for it." Her voice pitched so low that he almost did not hear her. She added, "Perhaps you're right in that I am safer with you than with him. I had heard rumours, only rumours, that he is a lawless and dishonourable man, but I did not wish to believe it." "Believe it, lassie," Ranulf said, gesturing toward the young shepherd's corpse. "There be your proof." Catrin nodded and glanced toward the parents, now holding one another, weeping. Those poor people. I feel terrible for them. "Aye, 'tis a hard thing to lose a bairn." Chapter 8. "How can you be so certain that was Gilbert's arrow?" Profoundly disturbed by the knowledge that Gilbert Mulvaney, an earl and someone she thought she could trust, had murdered a young shepherd in cold blood, Catrin remained with Ranulf throughout the rest of the day. She plagued him with questions about the Earl of Hargrove, and learned of his treacherous behaviour, but still felt uncertain of whom to trust. As Ranulf set his hands on his hips and stared down at her, Catrin tried not to squirm under his intense regard. After all, it could have been English brigands, out to steal sheep and kill the boy. "Nay," he replied, his voice even. "That fletching be Hargrove's own, lassie. That be all the evidence I need." "But why would he simply murder a shepherd when he had no cause?" she went on, persistent. "I mean, to just kill when the boy had done nothing to him." "If I was guessing, lassie," Ranulf said, gazing into the distance thoughtfully, "'tis me thoughts he wished no one to see him in Scotland, to sneak in and grab. He could have just waited, or gone around the shepherd," Catrin said. "Why would he kill him?" "He likes to kill." Catrin studied his face, gazed into what she thought were his eyes, free of guile. "How can I trust you?" "Ye canna," he replied calmly. "Trust be earned, lassie. I nae earn it yet." That statement gave her pause, and she pondered it on and off over the next few days. Having given her own word she would not try to run or escape again, Ranulf gave her more freedoms. "Ye may ride oot if you wish, lassie, provided ye agree to an escort. For your safety, o' course." Catrin nodded. "I agree. I need some items from the village. Will you, give me a few coins?" Grinning, Ranulf handed her a leather purse with silver and copper coins inside. "I knew ye would need tae shop, lasses, always day." Thus, mounted on her grey gelding, an escort of 4 armed clansmen wearing brigandines, riding to either side and behind her, Catrin rode into the village. She had learned its name was Conbury, and its inhabitants paid tithes to the Thorburn estates and owed their loyalty to Ranulf. Sliding down from her saddle, she tied the gelding to a post. Her escort followed suit and strolled behind her as she walked through the market in the village square. She purchased a comb, a brush, and ribbons for her hair from a fat woman who listened to her talk and scowled darkly. "Sassenach, wench," she muttered, taking Catrin's coin in exchange for the items. Catrin glared back at the woman and bit back the hot retort that rose to her lips. "Thank you," she said instead, her voice cold. Turning away, she heard the woman spit. She slowly swung back around, fingering the small dagger hanging from the belt around her hips. "You dare spit at me?" "Aye, Sassenach bitch!" Before Catrin could pull her knife and lunge at the woman, one of her escort intervened. He planted himself between the two women, his companions pulling Catrin away. Glaring at the shopkeeper, he snapped, "This be a guest o' Laird Ranulf. Say mind your manners, woman." "I ne'er be polite to nae Sassenach," she retorted, making an insulting gesture towards him. Catrin thought he was angry enough to say more, but he merely cursed under his breath and jerked his head for the others to follow. They walked further up the street, Catrin taking deep breaths to calm her temper. "I hope no one else feels the need to spit, or I may yet feel the urge to cut Scottish flesh." Her guard keeping a watch on the irate locals, who eyed her with emotions ranging from distaste to downright hostility, Catrin walked toward a merchant selling bolts of cloth. She liked the look of a pale lavender shade that she suspected would make a very nice gown and asked for a few yards of it. The shopkeeper leaned his hands on his table, palms down, and looked at her with open hatred. "Nay!" "She ha' coin to pay, man," said her escort. "Sell her the cloth." "I said nay," the merchant snapped. "Begone wi' ye." "Keep it," Catrin replied, growing furious and wishing she could plunge her dagger into the man's throat. "If he has so much custom that he has no need of mine, so be it." Spinning on her heel, Catrin stalked away. Half blinded by her rage, she paid little heed to the gang of youths loitering nearby. A sharp thud and an enormous burst of pain shot through her head. She staggered, putting her hand up to her brow. Her fingers came away slicked with her blood. Dazed, she gazed up in time to see the other boys cock their arms back. Stones struck her cheek, her shoulder, bouncing off her head, making her stagger. Stumbling, she fell to her knees, bleeding, her vision blurry. Her escort rushed in, yelling, shielding her from more thrown rocks. Holding up their arms to protect both her and themselves, stones bounced off their padded sleeves. One clansman, shouting curses, drew his sword and ran toward the gang. They broke and fled, scattering like a startled flock of geese in all directions. A hand under her arm helped Catrin to stand, and the soldier pulled out a cloth from his pocket to press against her bleeding head. "Tich, me lady," he said, his tone kind, concerned. "Hold that to your brow. The bleeding will stop soon." "I feel sick," she murmured, thinking she might vomit right there in the middle of the street with all the condemning Scottish eyes watching her. She swallowed hard, refusing to give them the satisfaction, and straightened her back. "We are leaving," she told her escort, and walked through the crowd of villagers, pushing her way through if they did not give way. Ignoring the mutters of anger and hate, Catrin met their hostility with her own defiance, refusing to bow her head or avert her eyes. Upon reaching her gelding, she mounted as her escort scrambled into their saddles. Riding at a walk, she endured their curses, their naming her a Sassenach bitch, deriding her as the enemy of the Scottish people. Though she had nothing to do with the continual wars between Scotland and her country of England, Catrin refused to defend her name to them, nor bow her head in shame. She would not give in to the temptation to scream insults, for that would lower herself to their level. Lady Catrin Waterford, daughter of the Duke of Whitewood, was too good to stoop that low. Upon reaching Ranulf's castle, She handed her gelding over to the grooms to care for, ignoring their stares at her bloody state. Though the servants and clansmen in the castle had treated her with nothing save respect and courtesy, she now counted them all amongst her enemies. Making her way stiffly to her chambers, she dismissed her maids with a curt order. Her head aching as though the boy had thrown an axe rather than a rock, her body hurting, Catrin sat in a chair near the window, gazing out at the distant lake. She wanted to weep, but refused to bow to that emotion, even in private. I am the daughter of a duke. I descend from royalty. They cannot bend me, nor break me. Not knowing how long she sat there, a knock at the door broke into her thoughts. Go away. Refusing to answer or invite the visitor in, she continued to stare out the window. When the door opened, she snapped her head around, prepared to scream the words, "Leave me alone!" Ranulf stuck his head around the door's edge. Catrin's words died in her throat, realising that her men-at-arms would have reported what happened to their Laird immediately, while she wanted to see no one, least of all the source of all her troubles. She knew he would not leave, even if she demanded it. Catrin? Shutting her jaw, she turned back to the window. Listening, she heard him walk across the room and drag a chair over to plant near her. When he rested his hand on hers as it sat in her lap, she snatched it away. "Do not touch me." "Ah, lass," Ranulf said, his tone soft, kind. "I be sorry ye be having such troubles. I ne'er thought the people might turn on ye." "Perhaps you should have. They are your people, after all." "Aye, the wars took their sons, and they be slow to forgive." "Really? Well, so am I." Catrin turned her face to glare at him. "You can leave me now. Your wounds do be needin' tending. They are none of your concern." Ranulf looked away, a tick in his jaw working as he stared across the chamber. "This be me fault?" "Yes, it is. If you want to make it right, take me home. I do not belong here. I had nothing to do with your brother's death. Take me home. Take me home, you filthy renegade." By the time she finished speaking, Catrin's voice rose to a scream, spittle flying from her mouth. Her hands itched to scratch his face, claw his eyes as her fear, rage, and frustration reached a breaking point. Her emotions spilled out of her in a flood, unwanted tears catching hold of her. Sobbing uncontrollably, she put her face in her hands, for the first time wishing that Ranulf had simply cut her throat and left her to die. Her head ached fiercely as she wept, the pain adding to her misery and loneliness and fear. Not caring if he thought less of her for her tears, she tried to scream at him again, commanding him to leave her alone. But the words stuck in her throat, and she choked on them. Before she realised what happened, he had plucked her from her chair and held her in his lap, permitting her to sob against his shoulder. Humming, he rocked her back and forth as he would a child, holding her in his powerful arms. Snugged up tightly to him, Catrin had no will to fight him, to demand he put her down, to leave her alone. Instead, despite her hatred of him, she found herself strangely comforted by his soothing humming, his strength, his compassion. Crying herself out on his shoulder, Catrin rested, exhausted both emotionally and physically. Had he tried then to take advantage of her, she could not have fought him off. He did not. His hand stroked down her hair over and over, his touch calming her further even as his humming ceased. "It be all right, lass," he murmured against her head. "I would take good care o' ye, I promise. It be all right." Catrin wearily lifted her head to meet his eyes. "Do not make a promise you cannot keep." Ranulf smiled, a tender and sweet expression. "I ne'er break a promise, lass." His hand brushed her loose hair back from her face, lightly touching her wound. "Might you permit me to care for that? And your other wounds?" Catrin nodded. "Yes." With the tender care he might show to a small child, and with the same effort Ranulf stood up with her body in his arms. He set her gently back in her chair, then went to the door. Opening it, he spoke to someone outside, then returned to her. "Your maid will bring hot water, cloths and a balm to soothe your pain," he said. Sitting beside her again, he pulled her hair back and once again closely examined her cut. "I nae think it needs stitched," he murmured, "but it dae be deep. Where else ye be hurt?" Unlacing the top of her gown, Catrin pulled the garment aside to show him the gouge and bruising on her shoulder, just under her collarbone. "But that is all I am showing you," she said. "The others are not nearly as bad, and I can care for them myself." Ranulf grinned, sending her a sly wink. "Ha, ye break me heart, lass. Careful I do not break your nose, should you attempt to explore further." "Nay, I be a gentleman," he said, catching her sardonic eye. "Oh, of a sorts." "Of sorts," she agreed. Minutes later, one of her maids returned with a small bucket of steaming water, white cloth cast over her shoulder. Knuckling her brow, she set the water and cloth beside Ranulf, then pulled a small leather jar from her pocket. At his gesture, she quickly retreated and closed the door behind her. "This will sting, lass," Ranulf warned her, "but it must be cleaned." "I know." Trying not to wince and hiss in pain, Catrin endured Ranulf caring for the wound on her brow. Caked and fresh blood came away on the cloth as he cleaned it. Then he applied the sweet-smelling ointment from the jar. Strangely, the stuff eased her pain as well. Dipping fresh linen into the bucket, he repeated the process on her shoulder injury. "Do your other wounds bleed?" he asked as he applied the balm to her collarbone. Catrin shook her head. "I think they are just bruises." He capped the leather jar and set it on a nearby table. "I will leave that for ye to put on them later. It will help the pain." "I can already feel it working," she admitted, lightly touching the rapidly drying stuff on her brow. "It does not hurt as much now, but my head does. It still throbs." Ranulf nodded. "I hae just the thing for that." Standing, he walked to the table that held a bottle of wine and cups and poured some into one of them. Taking a bit of paper from his pocket, he held it up to her, meeting her eyes. "This will help your pain," he said, "but will make you sleepy. Do you wish me to continue?" Catrin nodded. Though the afternoon had not yet waned toward evening, she wanted nothing more than to escape the throbbing in her head and her tumultuous emotions. "Yes, please." Ranulf opened the paper and slid a small amount of white powder into the cup. Swirling the wine inside to dissolve it, he brought it to her and sat back down. "Noo, drink this, lass. All o' it." Obedient, Catrin drank the wine, grimacing at the bitter taste. "Thank you," she murmured, handing him the empty cup. Smiling a little, Ranulf brushed a tendril of her red-brown hair from her cheek. "Ye be most welcome, lass." It did not take long for Catrin to feel woozy. With Ranulf's help, she made her wobbly way to the bed and sat down on the edge. Her fingers plucked at her gown's lacings, though she knew she should not undress while he was still there. Ranulf walked to the door, opened it, then glanced back at her. "I will send your maid to help ye," he said. Though she wanted to refuse, shaking her head brought only dizziness. Her tongue felt thick and fuzzy as though it had been changed by alchemy into a caterpillar, and she could not form words. When she squinted past the black dots swirling behind her eyes, Ranulf was gone. Fumbling with the laces again, she almost decided it was not worth the effort. Her maid suddenly materialized from seemingly nowhere Catrin could discern, murmuring soft words, and assisted her out of her blood-stained gown. Clad in her kirtle, Catrin crawled under the linens of her bed and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. When she woke, her chamber was dark and only the smouldering hearth fire gave out any light. She felt it was late at night, and a quick glance out her window informed her it was past midnight. Though her head still throbbed as she sat up, The pain did not come close to what it had been previously. Climbing out of bed, Catrin groggily walked to the hearth and added more wood. Blowing up a flame, she lit a taper and set it to the wick of a tallow candle. With light to see by now, she discovered a plate of food on the table: bread, cold roast beef, cheese and water. Not truly hungry, she nonetheless sat down and ate as much as she could hold. Still feeling unwell, she had no desire to vomit it all back up if she overate. Pouring herself more wine, she sat in her chair by the window and stared out into the night. Pondering Ranulf's kindness and consideration in caring for her, Catrin could not help but wonder at his motives. He behaved as though he cared for her, liked her even, yet he could be nothing except her enemy. Is he truly my enemy? The thought bothered Catrin, for, of course, she should consider him as nothing less. His brother murdered her own. Had they both been of Scottish birth and upbringing into the Scots code of honour, no doubt a blood feud would have sprung up between them. Yet he treated her with kindness, with integrity and with decency. Would her father have given that to him? Had their roles been reversed? No, he would not. Had Ranulf fallen into English hands, she had no doubt at all he would be beaten, tortured, and then ultimately killed. So, who was better, the Scottish or the English? Catrin sighed, drinking her wine, and knew such questions had no true answer. People on both sides of the border had the capabilities of being equally cruel or equally kind. The heady wine made her sleepy again. Rising, she moistened her fingertips and doused the candle, then climbed back into her bed. The new moon gleamed through the window, illuminating her room with its almost mystical light. She tried watching it for as long as she could, until her eyelids drooped and she slept again. She woke again with Ranulf himself, not her maid, clumsily entering her chamber with a tray filled with food and cups. He grinned as he discovered her still in bed. Catrin covered herself with the bed linens, scowling at his amusement and his presence. "Perhaps I might join you in there, lass," he said, his hazel-green eyes glinting with a lewd gleam. "Hey, a wee bit o' fun afore breakfast." "No," she snapped. "If you plan to eat all that with me, then leave my room while I get dressed." Setting the tray on the table, Ranulf grinned and offered her a mocking bow. "As me lady commands." Making sure he was gone and not planning to pop back in the moment she left the concealment of her sheets, Catrin emerged cautiously. Though her head and other bruises still pained her, her long hours sleeping seemed to have helped considerably. Without a maid to help her, she donned a clean gown over her kirtle and laced it up the front with easy freedom of movement. "You can come in now," she called. Ranulf opened the door and entered her chambers again. "I will send to the merchant in the village and purchase the cloth you fancied," he said, helping her to sit at the table. Catrin eyed him and the lavish amount of food both. "So, your men told you what I was interested in? Lavender, eh?" Catrin nodded. "Your people tell you everything." Though she found it odd, the clan Laird and ruler of this part of the Highlands serving her, she discovered she liked it. Used to being waited upon hand and foot by servants, she never considered that a nobleman might choose to serve another at the table. Yet, for Ranulf to do so, it seemed natural. "Aye," he replied, pouring her both cold water and warmed ale in cups. "It day help me to ken what be going on in me lands." "Are you going to punish the villagers?" Catrin bit into a hunk of black bread and butter, watching him carefully. Ranulf paused to glance at her as though giving her question serious consideration. "Do you wish me to?" Caught off guard that he turned the tables back on her, she reacted simply and honestly. She shook her head. "No, they were awful, but they reacted the way I suppose an English village might if you walked into it." "You be a wise as well as beautiful lass," he said, sitting down opposite her. "They be simple folk, Scots be at war with the Sassenach for too many years for old hatreds to die away. I suppose that is true? They broke their fast in companionable silence, one which Catrin felt reluctant to break. Ranulf was her enemy, yet no enemy she had ever heard of treated a captured prisoner the way Ranulf treated her. But how and when would his vengeance strike? While remaining in his castle and being treated as someone of her station should be treated, she knew she lived only at his sufferance. "If ye be feelin' up to it," Ranulf said, his mouth full, "hey aboot, we take some bows and arrows and see what kind o' archer ye are." Catrin grinned, swallowing her cheese and chasing it with a long swallow of her ale. "Are you willing to make any wagers on my skills?" "Knew what ye be wantin', outside o' wantin' to go home." Catrin pondered for a moment. "What do I want? If I win, I want your best horse as my own." Ranulf's eyes widened and he all but choked on his mouthful of bread. "Wet? Ah, nay, alas, I nay wager me stallion, nay for 100 lasses. All right, if I win, you let me ride him." "Ye hae a death wish? That lad be a mean bugger, only I can ride him." "If I win at archery," Catrin said, her tone sly, "and I ride your mean bugger successfully, then what do I get?" "Ye mean if ye nae dead?" "Yes, if I am not dead." Ranulf pondered. "If ye win at archery and ride me bugger, then I gae ye a diamond necklace. Deal?" Catrin spat on her hand and held it out. "Deal."
Scan the QR code or click on the link in the description to read the full book. The full audiobook will be available on YouTube in a few days. What did you like the most? Comment below and share this video on your social media and with your friends. Watch one of the following videos. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell to not miss any new audiobooks. Thank you for watching.